Welcome, everyone, to another edition of Frank's Amazing Podcast. I'm your host, Frank Agino. Sorry for the delay. I happened to be on vacation, but the New York Mets did complete two series while I was away. Their three-game set against the Washington Nationals and a three-game set against the Atlanta Braves. Two pivotal series, very important series, because one of the things we talked about, the main takeaway in the last podcast when they beat the Marlins, was that, okay, the Mets are on this nice run. They finally got into the wild card race. They're above 500. They've won a lot of games in a row, but they've done it against weak competition, against sub-500 teams. What happens when the Mets play these above 500 teams, these playoff caliber teams, first place teams like the Atlanta Braves? Are the results going to be different? And the thing is that we kind of saw more of the middle of the season Mets, where you're still not exactly positive what type of a team they are, because here you go, they win the series against the Nationals thanks to some miracles, but then lose the series to the Atlanta Braves, some due to performance and some due to the manager. So definitely a lot of takeaways, because all these games were close, you know what I mean? There was no blowout. Even the game you thought was going to be a blowout ended up being close due to the manager and due to the performance of the team. So a lot of different things to talk about, but we will do it in chronological order. Start with the Washington Nationals series. First game of the series, Friday night, Marcus Stroman making his Citi Field debut against Stephen Strasburg. This was a game that I was really looking forward to, because I was very curious to see how different was Marcus Stroman going to be this time compared to his first start as a Met against the Pittsburgh Pirates. I said in that podcast I was really concerned because of the way Marcus Stroman did not have any composure. I talked about how he was sweating a lot. He couldn't get a strike over, and then said, I was really excited. The nerves kind of got to me, and I expect and I know that I'll be better. And then my thing was, well, if you're nervous on a road start against the Pittsburgh Pirates, a team that's in last place in their division, one of the worst teams in the whole National League, if you feel nervous against them, what happens when you have this huge game against the Washington Nationals? Are you going to have your composure? Are you going to be the pitcher that you're supposed to be? And the thing for Marcus Stroman is that, all in all, it ends up looking like an okay performance. But that's the thing. It was just okay. And the other thing is that it was extremely lucky. My thing about Stroman is that he had his good moments, he had his bad moments. But all in all, the fact that Marcus Stroman had 9 hits and 3 walks, he had 12 base runners. Now, he was very fortunate just to finish with the 4 runs. But still, that is not a recipe for success. That is not something that is sustainable. The Mets expected much more out of Marcus Stroman. They made the move to think that he was going to be the final piece of their starting rotation, because the big thing when you got Stroman was, one of the great things about having a great starting rotation is that it gives you a chance to be in every single game, and that also means it gives you a chance to win every single game. So that was the big reason for getting Marcus Stroman, to make a complete, dominant, competitive starting 5 in the starting rotation. And for Stroman, it's just been very average at best. When you think about him giving up 3 runs, or in this case 4 runs, and him going the 6 innings, throwing 108 pitches, having to escape many tough jams, whether the bases were loaded, whether it was second and third, second and first and third, you know what I mean? When you have 9 hits and you have 3 walks, you had 12 base runners on in the matter of 6 innings. So for the Washington Nationals to only push across 4 runs, that tells you all of the very big-time pitches that Stroman had to make. He had some nice strikeouts, don't get me wrong. One that stands out is Anthony Rendon at the plate, a Met killer, a guy who I'm pretty sure leads the National League in runs driven in. Great RBI guy. He puts the ball in play above 300 average. And Stroman's facing him with a couple runners on, 2 outs. Marcus Stroman gets a huge strikeout to get out of the inning. That's one of the big outs that he would get. And he also had a streak where he had struck out 5 batters in a row. That was nice. He struck out 7 of the first 9 or 10 batters. So we definitely saw a lot of strikeouts. But here's the problem. He had 7 strikeouts in the first 9 or 10 batters. He finished with 9 strikeouts for the ball game. Once that 5 strikeout streak ended, all of a sudden things changed in a really bad way for Marcus Stroman as the Nationals. That's when they really started putting together hit after hit, and it's how they ended up with all these base runners. And then the other thing was that on the other side, they're facing Stephen Strasburg. And Strasburg is a guy that, we know he's a good pitcher. His last start, prior to this one against the Arizona Diamondbacks, was not good at all. He gave up a ton of runs, particularly home runs. They chased him out early. And Strasburg has given the Mets a lot of trouble, and it just seems that whenever they play him, all of a sudden the Mets bats go to sleep. They can't put together any runs, even rallies or hits. They strike out a lot, swing out a lot of pitches out of the strike zone, and that was going on for the first 3 innings. We saw a lot of strikeouts. We saw nobody getting any hits. Didn't look like there was much life in the bats. And I was saying to myself, okay, well, we just saw the Mets pounce on the White Sox and the Marlins and the Padres and the Pirates 2 times. And they had all this offense. We saw the young guys stepping up big time, the core 5 I talked about, with Rosario, McNeil, Conforto, J.D. Davis, and Alonso. And then you had the contributions of a Wilson Ramos, and you're thinking, all right, now the Mets have a much better offense than they did in years past when they would struggle against Steven Strasburg. You're thinking now, with these young guys, with these new players, newly acquired Joe Panic, that the Mets offense is going to look much better. But it looked just the same, and I was getting really worried because the Mets found themselves in a 3-0 hole, and I was saying to myself, listen, Stroman doesn't have it anymore, and now Strasburg is rolling. It's going to be very tough to come back from, but before you know it, Jeff McNeil draws a nice walk, and then Pete Alonso hits a huge 2-run homer to get the Mets right back in the game, make it a 1-run game. J.D. Davis follows it up with a nice back-to-back home run, tie game. So the Mets are right back in it. And then from that point, that is where you had Stroman, really trying to battle and keep the game right where it was. And he would have to escape the jams and keep the game close. But then after the 6th inning, I said to myself, okay, Marcus Stroman's at 103 pitches. He escaped another huge jam thanks to a major play by Ahmed Rosario jumping up, snagging a line drive, saving a run or 2. With the way the Mets throw the ball around, it could have been more than that. So you're saying to yourself, okay, 103 pitches. So far at this point, 11 base runners. Marcus Stroman should be done. You don't need to have him go out there any longer. Go to the bullpen, see what happens, because at this point, it's a tie game. But Mickey Cowley does not do that. He decides to roll Marcus Stroman back out there. And I found it really fascinating that following the 4-game streak of the Miami Marlins, Mickey Cowley did his weekly spot on WFAN, his weekly interview. And one of the interesting things that Mickey Cowley said was that he wanted to let the starting pitchers, take the gloves off and, like the way he worded it, let the horses run. You know what I mean? So let starting pitchers go deeper into games, let them increase their pitch count, and go out there where normally you would take them out. And in this case, I don't think this was the time to do it. I'm all for letting the starting pitchers go deeper into games if they really have it going on, like we saw Steven Matz do against the Braves. I mean, that's the one that I want to talk about the most. But I just thought that if Stroman doesn't have it, there's no point in pushing him out there for more. But Cowley decides to do that, and Stroman gives up a leadoff walk to Trey Turner. And that is always very, very dangerous because with the way Trey Turner runs and with the struggles that the Mets have throwing out base runners, that's just as good as a double or triple because he's going to steal second, no problem, and he can steal third base if he wanted to as well. But still, now the Mets have to go to Justin Wilson because of the left-handed hitter Amazin, and Justin Wilson gets Amazin out, and then instead of going to a right-hander like the also newly acquired Brad Brock, Mickey Cowley decides to stick out there, have Justin Wilson face the right-hander, and that's a dangerous right-hander in Anthony Rendon. I just talked about him facing Stroman, a Met killer, guy that puts the ball in play, someone you don't really want to face. And what does Anthony Rendon do? 2-run homer, Mets are down 5-3. And a big part of that was the mistake that Mickey Cowley made of having Stroman out there to put Trey Turner on base. And the second mistake was having Justin Wilson face the right-handed batter. And the other thing that was one of the main takeaways from Mickey Cowley's weekly interview was him saying that Justin Wilson has been lights out. Well, all of a sudden, that changed very quickly with his performance on Friday night. And spoiler alert, the way he pitched on Sunday afternoon, Justin Wilson is far from lights out and is definitely someone that you have to be concerned about and is not a guarantee, not a lockdown reliever. The Mets don't even have any of those guys, honestly. After you watch what happened after the series against the Braves, the Mets do not have a single lockdown reliever in this bullpen. No one could be trusted, to be honest with you, and neither could the manager. So that right there, I mean, we're kind of going to skip ahead here, but that's just a major problem. If the bullpen can't be trusted and the person managing the bullpen can't be trusted, you're putting yourself in a really, really tough spot to win a wild card. And with the injuries that have now happened and the injuries that already had occurred prior to these 2 series and the bench that the Mets have that has given them very, very little, it is not going to be an easy wild card by any means, especially with how many teams are in it. The Mets don't have to jump all these teams again, but still, it's just that, like, when you have a series right now, the Brewers facing the Washington Nationals, the Mets gain ground, but they also don't gain ground because someone's going to win. So one of those teams are winning, and with all these head-to-head matchups, you think of the Cubs and Cardinals being tied in the division, so one of them gets the wild card. And to me, it's just like the Mets are going to have to really win a lot of games because these other teams, they're going to win in their head-to-head matchups. So it's going to be hard to totally gain ground, especially if you're losing the series to the Atlanta Braves. You cannot afford to be losing series when Bryce Harper's hitting walk-off grand slams. You know what I mean? So I'm just very fascinated to see how these next couple of series go because, again, we talked about the schedule picking up. The Mets are fortunate that they get to play the Kansas City Royals, and, you know, they're way out of it. But then the schedule's going to pick right back up, and they're going to have to face the red-hot Cleveland Indians and the Braves again and the Cubs again, the Phillies again and the Nationals again and the Phillies again. You know what I mean? Like, that's going to decide the season right there. And I've talked about this before, but it reminds me so much of that stretch of games where I said, okay, you know, the Mets are winning one and losing one, but they're going to have that really big stretch against the Phillies, against the Cubs, against the Braves, and they're going to get to prove themselves. Are they a good team or are they a bad team? They got swept the 4 games by the Phillies. They blew the games against the Cubs due to the bullpen, especially Seth Lugo, which, you know, sucks to say. But still, that's where the season really looked like it was over. They were able to take advantage of the lesser teams, get back in it, and now they have to beat the good teams as well. I mean, you cannot get the wild card just beating up on bad teams and winning a game or two from the good teams. You have to win consistently, you have to win series, and you can't go on any extended losing streaks, and you have to win the head-to-head matchups. This way you can actually get in front of these teams and stay in front of them. But to continue with the wrap-up of the Friday night game, so now you have the Mets down 5-3, and you have to go to all these different relievers. Then we saw Robert Gsellman, who also ended up being an earned run due to a wild pitch from Luis Avilan, who came in the 9th inning. And it was because Avilan did not cover home plate. The ball bounces right next to Wilson Ramos. And, of course, Trey Turner, I talked about his speed. He gets to home plate, no problem. Now the Mets are down in the 9th inning, 6-3, with Sean Doolittle on the mound. And if you remember, in the April series that the Mets played against the Washington Nationals, Sean Doolittle blew one game in particular over the weekend. And it just seems like the Mets have had Sean Doolittle's number this year, which I feel like has not been the case historically. I mean, the Mets usually don't do good against top-tier relievers. You think of what happened earlier this year against someone like Josh Hader. But still, the Mets felt pretty confident when Sean Doolittle took them out, even though he's had a good year all in all. I mean, this is an all-star caliber reliever, and he's been an all-star before. But the Mets, they got a clutch hit. They had, you know, Joe Paddock get on. They had Wilson Ramos get a hit. And before you know it, the Mets are down 6-3 with Todd Frazier at the plate. And, you know, I've talked about Todd Frazier all year. I'm not a big fan of his. I'm not a believer of Todd Frazier. I don't like his player. I talk about a lot, all or nothing. He could give you a home run or he can give you an 0-for-4 with 3 strikeouts. And this happened to be the all from Todd Frazier. He hooks a really nice 3-run homer, just fair, tie game, and the crowd just went wild, and it was really, really exciting because now all of a sudden you feel like the Mets have some type of like magic, or the miracle Mets, that they have this feeling where they're never really out of it, that they can always make a comeback, and you don't know who it's going to be. The fact that you're able to get a contribution from honestly your worst hitter in that particular lineup, that is a major plus, and it makes managing the lineup much more difficult for the opposing team because they're saying to yourself, all right, well, you know, we could just pitch to Todd Frazier because he's not very good. But now in the back of your mind, you're saying to yourself, well, you never know when he's going to hit another 3-run homer. So we have to be careful with him as well. And again, it just gives the Mets a lot more possibilities. So they have the game tied 6-6. Sean Doolittle's on the ropes. And then you have clutch hitting from Ahmed Rosario. He got on, and there were 2 runners on for Michael Conforto. And he hits the walk-off RBI double that really, really got the crowd going because the Mets ended up winning this game 7-6. And like I said, was a miracle. This was a game I was not expecting the Mets to win at all. And both times, when the Mets were down 3-0, and Stroman looked like he was starting to crack, and Strasburg was pitching really well, I said to myself, man, there's no way the Mets are going to win this game. Then they tied up. I said, okay, it's a brand new game. They have a chance. But when Justin Wilson gave up that home run to Rendon, and then the wild pitch where Trey Turner scores, and Sean Doolittle's on the mound, and Todd Frazier is, you know, my biggest hope, I said to myself, no way the Mets are winning this. But, Todd Frazier hit that big 3-run home run. And even when they tied it, I was saying, okay, but are they going to win it, or is this going to be another one of those long extra inning games where somehow, some way, the Mets blow it in like the 14th or 15th inning? That was not the case. They were able to get done in 9 innings and win the game. So that was a very big win. You start the weekend off right. You now have a 7-game winning streak. So you're on to Saturday with Noah Syndergaard going up against Patrick Corbin. And for Noah, he struggled in the first inning. And all of a sudden you say to yourself, okay, the Mets are down 2-0. They're going to have to make another comeback. And once again, it was in the 4th inning on back-to-back home runs. And again, J.D. Davis was a big part of it. J.D. Davis hits a really nice home run, and Wilson Ramos follows him up with a birthday Buffalo bomb. You know what I mean? Because this was Wilson Ramos' birthday, and he hits his second deck. He absolutely crushed it. And one of the other things that I want to talk about in this podcast just is Wilson Ramos in general and the difference he makes compared to somebody like Tomas Nido. And Tomas Nido, he's been in a big 0-4, and Wilson Ramos, he's been swinging the hot back. He now, after these games against the Royals, he has a 12-game hitting streak. He's batting over 400. He still hits way too many ground balls to the left side. He hits into way too many double plays. He's been striking out on pitches out of the strike zone. But all in all, I mean, if you have a 12-game hitting streak and you're batting, over 400 in the last 12 games, there's not too much to complain for. But still, I don't love the type of outs that Wilson Ramos makes. Double plays and strikeouts are literally the two worst outcomes that you can make. And Wilson Ramos does it far too frequent, but it's at least he gets his 12-game hitting streak and his 400 average and his home run every now and then. Or every now and then he'll get an opposite field hit, whereas Tomas Nido, you get absolutely nothing, no hits at all. But in the Saturday game, the Mets made their first comeback. So now you have 2-2, brand new ball game all over again. And now you're saying to yourself, okay, well, how will the bullpen do in this situation? And Noah Syndergaard, like I said, he struggled in the first inning, and you were pretty worried because he threw a lot of pitches. And you're saying to yourself, okay, well, the Mets just used all those guys last night, and they did not do very good in the bullpen. So it is extremely important for Noah Syndergaard and all these pitchers in general. I've talked about this a lot. But because the bullpen is so bad, you need the starting pitchers to go deep into the game so that you need the least amount of the bullpen as possible. You want the least amount of innings as you can, because anytime they're out there, you're in a very dangerous situation because they could blow it just like that before you know it. And for the Mets, Seth Lugo comes in after Noah Syndergaard was able to battle through 7 innings at only 97 pitches. And again, this is one of the situations where you talk about let the horses run, and bringing out Stroman for the 7th inning to face Trey Turner, I thought was a bad move because Stroman had just had the bases loaded and they've been hitting him hard all night. But Noah Syndergaard was in a really good groove and was only at 97 pitches. I kind of would let him go out there for the 8th inning and just see what happens. But with a game this close and arrested Seth Lugo almost had the record for the most retired batters in a row, hadn't give up a run in a month, and I've been talking about him like crazy. He's been, lights out, and that he's been the true lights out. Forget Justin Wilson, Mikhail was saying lights out. Seth Lugo was the guy that had been lights out for the Mets. But Seth Lugo serves up a big home run to Juan Soto, and it was a frustrating home run because it looked like Seth Lugo, he had just tied the record. It looked like he was about to break it, but then all of a sudden Juan Soto steps out of the box. And right after that, you see Seth Lugo was kind of perturbed by it. He was just about to pitch, and it messed up his rhythm. And he left a pitch that was right in a lefty's wheelhouse, down and in. And that's where lefties can take it over the right field wall. And that is exactly what Juan Soto did and put the Nationals out in front. And now you're saying to yourself, okay, now the Mets are going to need another miracle comeback. So they go to the bench, and there's nobody on that bench. This time it was Luis Guillorme. And Luis Guillorme batting under 200. He's never hit a home run. He never gets any hits at all. You really were not expecting him to do any damage. But before you know it, line drive, upper deck, tie game. And you're just saying to yourself, oh my gosh, maybe there is some magic in these Mets. Maybe they do have a little bit of the miracle Mets. The 50th anniversary of the 1969 team with these miraculous home runs that they're pulling off late in games. And that was really encouraging. And then shortly after, Mets get a few more guys on base, and J.D. Davis with the excellent at-bat to get a sacrifice fly to put the Mets ahead. And, J.D. Davis, he has ended up being one of the true difference makers of the season because a lot of these guys, you kind of knew what to expect for the most part. You knew that Todd Frazier was going to be all or nothing. Michael Conforto was going to be up or down. Rosaro's been much more improved, and that's a great sign. Pete Alonso has been much better than you could have expected. Ramos, a little worse than expectations. Lagares has been just as bad as you expected. But J.D. Davis, he was a complete unknown because this is a guy that we've talked about before, but was in the minor leagues, the Houston Astros system. Did really well in the minor leagues, but in his major league opportunities, didn't make much of it. But he talked about the very particular game, April 6th against Patrick Corbin. He had 2 home runs, really put himself on the map and made him look like a big league player. And in this stretch where the Mets have gone over 500 and into the wild card race, J.D. Davis has been such a huge part of it because after Dominic Smith went down with a stress reaction in the foot, J.D. Davis played every single day. He's made the most of it with the batting average above 300 and having these veteran-like at-bats. The fact that he was able to stay level and just hit the fly ball with the bases loaded to get the sacrifice fly that ended up being the difference maker in the game, that is so encouraging because in this new era of baseball where everybody is so, hell-bent on getting the home runs, it was very nice that J.D. Davis did not try to kill the ball and hit a grand slam. He went with the pitch, took it to the opposite field, and it ended up being the difference maker in the game because even though Seth Lugo gave up that home run in the 8th inning, they stuck with him in the 9th inning, and I thought that was a pretty gutsy move by Mickey Callaway because when I saw Seth Lugo give up that home run, I said to myself, okay, if Lugo gave up the home run, he probably does not, I knew he did not have his best stuff. This would not be the most ideal time to make him do a 6-out save, but he did, and he had a really good 9th inning, so that worked out. The Mets win 4-3. So now you got the first 2 games of the series. Sunday, you got Jacob deGrom against Anibal Sanchez. Looks like a favorable matchup. You know what I mean? Jacob deGrom is a great pitcher, and you're not facing Max Scherzer. So it definitely advantaged New York Mets. But once again, they fall behind 3-0 very, very quickly. And, this one, I'm still not even over this play, even though it's like almost a week later. But I just can't believe that Asdrubal Cabrera, the former Met, he hits a ground ball. Pete Alonso makes a nice stop to get it, makes an off throw, and Jacob deGrom, one of the very underrated things about him, we know he's one of the best pitchers in the National League, one of the best pitchers in baseball and what have you, but one of the things that Jacob deGrom is also is he is an exceptional athlete. He's a very good fielder as a pitcher. He's a good hitter as a pitcher, and he can also run the bases as well because of his experience as a shortstop in college and high school and what have you. But for deGrom, when you have him covering first base and Alonso gives a bit of a wide throw and it hits deGrom's glove, I honestly expect deGrom to make that catch every single time. That's just how good of a fielder he has been throughout his career. And when deGrom dropped the ball and these guys started crossing home plate and the ball took the craziest roll and deGrom has to run to chase it down and he chucks it home and then Wilson Ramos drops the ball and the Mets ended up giving up 3 runs on what's a ground ball to first base. It seems impossible. It seems little league-like stuff. And you know what? Final score of this game, we'll skip ahead to what the final score was, but the final score is 7-4, 3-run difference. You catch that ball, that's 3 runs right there. So that was the difference maker in the game. Just that one play in the first inning. And for Asdrubal Cabrera, it shows you the value of just putting the ball in play. It may look like you grounded out to first base and the inning is over. But if you have a guy who's not known for being a defensive first baseman, we know that's what Pete Alonso struggles with, you can end up scoring 3 runs just because you put the ball in play, even though it wasn't a hit. You know what I mean? So again, just the value of putting the ball in play, something that the Mets and just every team in baseball should try to do more of instead of stop being so caught up on trying to hit home runs. But once again, the Mets made another comeback. This time it was in the 2nd inning. It was done very nicely. You had a Joe Panic RBI single. You had Jacob deGrom reach base with a bunt, so there he is, that speed. I talked about him being athletic. Then Jeff McNeil gets a really nice 2-run double to tie up the game 3-3. Once again, brand new ball game. Jacob deGrom settled down, pitched much better, but he threw so many pitches in the first inning, even more than Noah Syndergaard. He did not get to go deep into this game. He finished with 5 innings of 4 hits, 3 runs. They're all unearned because of the error on Pete Alonso. And honestly, I feel like the error, you could have given an error to deGrom as well. And those 3 runs are on him as well. It looks good for his ERA, but to me, deGrom truly gave up those 3 runs by not catching that ball. Even though it's a bad throw by Alonso, I just expect deGrom to catch it. But I digress from that, and another example of I would let the pitcher go out there because now that deGrom is settled down and we know we need the bullpen, you cannot rely on the New York Mets bullpen to give you the 6th inning, 7th inning, 8th inning, 9th inning against the Washington Nationals lineup. It just isn't going to happen. They are not going to keep the game close. This bullpen is not capable of that, especially because you do not have Seth Lugo because you just used him for the 6-out save. So I did not love pulling DeGrom at the 101 pitches. I will let him have one more inning. And again, you see what happens. And I would be like, if you give a one base runner, you're out. Kind of like he did with Stroman. But what I don't get is that Stroman was not pitching well, has not earned the right to go out there for another inning as a member of the New York Mets. He hasn't done diddly squat as a Metropolitan. But Noah Syndergaard, he was very worthy of going out there again. Jacob deGrom was very worthy of going out there again. Steven Matz was very worthy of going out there against the Atlanta Braves. But Mickey Callaway doesn't bring those guys in. He decides to go to the bullpen, and Luis Avilan, he comes in, he gets a couple guys out, but he gives up 2 hits, and Brad Brock has to come in, bail him out, get Brian Dozier to pop up. Robert Gsellman comes in, he gives up 2 runs, and he was only able to get 1 batter out. And these were not, Gsellman was not in when these runs scored, but he gave up all these base runners, did not have it. I mean, that's the thing about Robert Gsellman. He is so up and down and so inconsistent. You just never know what Robert Gsellman you're going to get. You could get 2 score innings out of Robert Gsellman, or he can only get 1 guy out and gives up a bunch of base runners. So he has to go to lights out Justin Wilson. And what does Justin Wilson do against Asdrubal Cabrera, the former Met? Gives up a go-ahead 2-run double. So in the 2 appearances that Justin Wilson had in this series, he gives up go-ahead hits in both instances. But this is a guy who recently had been lights out. I just don't want to hear it. And Justin Wilson, I mean, another failure by Brodie Van Wagenen, not being able to improve the bullpen. Justin Wilson was a really, really bad signing. I liked it at the time, but I hate him now, because he cannot come through in the big spots with the game on the line. You cannot trust Justin Wilson. That's just plain and simple. So Justin Wilson, he gives up the go-ahead runs, and he was able to get out of it because Juan Soto got hurt round at third base. And right for this, Juan Soto was back within the next game for the Washington Nationals. So some injury that was, right? Meanwhile, for the Mets, this is the worst takeaway of the whole podcast, but Jeff McNeil straining his hamstring against the Braves. He's on the injured list. So McNeil strains hamstring. He's on the IL. Soto looked seriously hurt, and he's back the next game. So that's typical Mets luck. But this was really fascinating, this game. This was like the one really good takeaway, was that Jeurys Familia came in the 8th inning. And we know it's been a struggle for Familia. I talked about him all year, how terrible he's been, and how another Brodie Van Wagenen failure has not helped the bullpen, all these different things with Familia. But he comes in, strikes out the side, 11 strikes on 13 pitches, looked like vintage at his best Jeurys Familia. And I could not believe it, because we had not seen this guy all year, pretty much in a couple of years, honestly. Because one of the things I've talked about with Familia is that as a New York Met, each year he has gotten progressively worse. So we have not seen that type of dominance Familia in a long time. And it was nice to see that he still has it in him. And he's been better ever since, you know what I mean? He's had good outings his last few times out there. Hasn't had the most high leverage of spots yet. But you know what? With the way Edwin Diaz has been, and he's still terrible, by the way, against the Braves and the Royals. Seth Lugo, he hasn't been quite as good. And I just feel like if Familia finally has it going, you need to have him do what he was supposed to do. We talked about the Mets truly competing for the playoffs. I said Edwin Diaz is going to have to be himself. And the same thing could be said for Jeurys Familia. So you have got to see, is Familia back, or does he still stink? I think you have to put Familia in tougher spots late in games, because you cannot trust these other guys. You just have to see it, because here's the thing. Familia has a more proven track record than Justin Wilson does, especially as a member, as a New York Met. And the same thing with Edwin Diaz. I know Diaz is supposed to be much better than Familia, but Edwin Diaz has not done anything for the Mets. Meanwhile, Familia has, even in the playoffs. I know in the World Series he wasn't great, but still, leading up to it, he was very good. And the wild card game, too, I don't want to talk about it, but still, you know what I mean. Familia's had success as New York Met. No one can deny that. But the fact that they lose this game, and speaking of Edwin Diaz, he comes in the 9th inning, and, you know, the Mets, they got to run back. So it's only 5-4. It's a 1-run game, and Sean Doolittle's going to come in. He doesn't have high confidence. The Mets are going to have the top of the order up. They have a very good chance to still win this game, make another comeback, and sweep the series. So here's Edwin Diaz. walking out of me, and you're like, Edwin, what are you doing? And then he faces Victor Robles, who took over because, as I mentioned, Juan Soto had gotten hurt, and Victor Robles hits a bomb, 2-run homer. Mets are down 7-4, and you're just like, Edwin Diaz, what the heck, man? Because this guy comes in, and every time he's out there, he gives up these home runs, 2-run shot, 3-run shot, solo shot. Every time he gives up home runs. And the thing about Edwin Diaz, that it looks like it doesn't really bother him that much. He just goes with his shoulders or whatever, and he just keeps going out there and pitching like crap, you know what I mean? So Edwin Diaz, total nightmare. I mean, this trade with him and Cano, it's probably going to go down as the worst trade in Mets history, honestly. When you think of Kelenic, probably is going to be a great player, and I'm going to be wrong. I mean, I had a feeling Kelenic was going to be good, but I didn't really care, to be honest with you. I just wanted to win, so that's why I was willing to take the risk of getting Cano and Diaz. And Justin Dunn has been good, and Cano stinks and is hurt, and Diaz stinks and is not hurt, but he still stinks. And for the Mets, it really, it messed up their opportunity of making a comeback. When you saw Edwin Diaz do that, it took the life out of the team. And they ended up going down 1-2-3 in the ninth inning with Sean Doolittle, and they lost that game. And that was disappointing because the Mets really did have a nice opportunity to sweep the series. Had Jacob deGrom caught the ball, had Justin Wilson not been terrible, and had Edwin Diaz not been terrible, the Mets very easily could have won that game. But it was on to Atlanta. They had the day off on Monday to recuperate, travel to Atlanta, face the Braves, who the Mets have not seen in quite some time. And the Atlanta Braves, they've had their struggles recently as well with their bullpen. We think about the moves they made at the trade deadline because they want to improve the bullpen. They got All-Star Shane Green, and they also acquired former All-Star Mark Melancon. And for Shane Green, he had been lights out for the Tigers, but he had been so bad for the Braves, he had been removed from the closer's role, and they replaced it with Melancon, and even Melancon had not been shut down. So for the Mets, the Braves, they're not that crazy of a team. They have their core four, that were playing in this game of Acuna, Albies, Freeman, and Donaldson. And I know they're missing Dansby Swanson and Nick Markakis. Fortunate for the Mets, but I mean, those guys, they pretty much do almost all of the production for the Atlanta Braves, and they are some tremendous players, especially Acuna, Albies, Freeman. Those guys, I mean, you really could build a team around them, and they always kill the Mets, and they did again in this series. And for the Mets, Zach Wheeler was on the mound. Wheeler had been really, really good ever since the trade deadline had ended, and he knew he was still going to be a member of the New York Mets. He finally looked like himself again. He looked much closer to that second half Wheeler of last year, who we were hoping is just going to be Zach Wheeler in general. I've talked about it before, but Wheeler's supposed to be a big-time prospect when they acquired him from the San Francisco Giants in the trade for Carlos Beltran. And for Wheeler, he had never been able to fully put it all together, whether due to injuries or inconsistencies. And for Zach Wheeler, being in his home state of Georgia, that's where he's from, he pitches, okay there for the most part. But in this game, he gives up a career-high 12 hits, 5 runs, 2 walks, and he just got beat up, you know what I mean? These Braves are relentless. Acuna and Albies and Freeman and Donaldson, even Matt Joyce and Brian McCann. I mean, the whole lineup, Ender and Ciarte, everybody was just putting together line drive after line drive. Donaldson with 3 hits, Freeman with a couple hits. And for Wheeler, it put the Mets, again, in a tough spot. And then offensively, the Mets really did not do much. They struck out far too much. At the top of the order, the guys that set the table, McNeil and Rosario, 3 strikeouts apiece. That is very surprising because, number one, Jeff McNeil is not a guy who strikes out a lot, and that's one of my favorite things about him. Number two, Ahmed Rosario been swinging a hot bat. I mean, he was such an unsung hero in the Washington National Series. He had a bunch of multi-hit games, and this week has had a lot of multi-hit games, and his average is almost up to 290, which is a complete shocker to me, and I'm very happy that it has finally happened with Ahmed Rosario because he's someone I've been very, very tough on since he was supposed to be so good and he was always so bad. But he's finally, looking closer to, we talked about Wheeler, but living up to the guy that you were supposed to be. I mean, just doing your job. It seems like something that's simple, but for a lot of these guys, you think of Edwin Diaz, it's harder to do. You think just be yourself, do what you normally do, but you never know with these sports. Every now and then, the guy can just put together a really terrible year, and we've definitely seen a fair share of New York Metropolitans do that. Alonso, he had the 1 hit, Davis 1 hit, Ramos a hit. But a lot of the times, I mean, they get hits here and there, but when they string hits together, they strand them there. When they hit into double plays or they strike out, Juan Lagares had 4 hits, and one of his hits looked like it was going to be an RBI, But slow Todd Frazier gets thrown at home plate on a great throw by Ronald Acuna Jr. So that was disappointing. But at least Juan Lagares got you 4 hits. And Juan Lagares also got another hit late that made the game 5-3. Looked like the Mets were going to make a comeback. But then Wilson Ramos strikes out on a pitch out of the strike zone. And, of course, Michael Conforto strikes out against the former Met, Jerry Blevins. And that was really disappointing. And for Conforto to put together an offer after having that big game on Friday, he hasn't really done much since. And, that's a little problematic because I know that Conforto was going to hit the cold streak. He was just so hot against the Pirates and Marlins. You knew that a streak just as cold was coming, and I knew it was going to come at an inopportune time. And, of course, it happened against the Atlanta Braves where Michael Conforto really did not do much in this series. They didn't get any big hits like he did in that first game against the Washington Nationals. But for the Mets, the bullpen was actually really good in this game. Of course it was when Zach Wheeler was bad. I mean, that's usually how it goes. But Brock, 1-2-3 inning. Avilan, he gave up a hit, but no runs. Familia got his one batter out, finished up the inning for Avilan. And Drew Gagnon threw a scoreless 9th inning. So, well, actually a scoreless 8th inning, excuse me, because the Atlanta Braves were the home team. But for the Mets, it looked like they were going to maybe make another comeback with the way the Braves bullpen has struggled. And you have, Shane Green struggling, giving up 2 runs. And they had to go to Melanson, and he had a couple runners on, but the Atlanta Braves were able to get out of it. So you move on to the next game. This time it was Steven Matz on the mound. And you know what? This game, I'm not even going to talk about. I'm just going to talk about later on. So the Mets, it was another one of these performances where it looked like they're not stringing together that many quality at-bats, and they had so many opportunities to go out in front, but they stranded base runners every time, whether it was with double plays or strikeouts, whether it was Ramos or literally everybody. They missed so many RBI opportunities early in this game. Eventually, Rosario gets the big hit, and Panic gets a nice hit, and J.D. Davis brings them both in with a nice 2-run. I'm not sure if it was a single or double because it was hit very shallow, kind of a broken bat type of hit. So now the Mets are out in front after Steven Matz. He was going first to third and batted for himself, and Matz had retired 14 in a row, was really rolling at only 79 pitches. And what does Mickey Callaway do? He pulls Steven Matz, and you know what? This drove me absolutely insane. I thought Steven Matz was hurt because it boggled my mind so badly that you would do such a thing. Considering how good the Atlanta Braves lineup is, the fact that Matz was able to retire 14 of those guys in a row, no matter what, you have got to leave him out there. You cannot take him out of this game and hope that the bullpen is going to hang on for 3 more innings. That is not a recipe for success. The probability of that happening is extremely unlikely. And I'm not an analytics guy, but just watching the Mets, you know the bullpen stinks. And if Matz is pitching this well, you have got to keep him in this game. And you know what? Mickey Callaway is a liar. Because if he said, the gloves are off, we're going to let the horses run, and we're going to let the starting pitchers go deeper into games. Meanwhile, you got Matz dealing at only 79 pitches. How in the world do you remove him out of this game? I mean, it drove me crazy. He brings in Seth Lugo, and, that was the only thing I was okay about. I'm like, okay, at least he took him out for Lugo. But you were still going to need a 9th inning. Lugo was not going to throw 3 innings. So I didn't know who the heck he thought he was going to use for the 9th inning. I'll tell you who he was going to use after we finish. But Seth Lugo did not have it once again. And he's giving up hit after hit after hit, run after run. Lead is gone. It's tied. Now they're behind, and the Braves are scoring run after run, and he's keeping Lugo out there. And I said to myself, if Lugo doesn't have it, you pull him. He's not going to get it back. He's already blown the game. Get him out of there. But he just let Lugo serve up hit after hit after hit, and the Mets are falling behind too much, and before you knew it, the game was over. Again, like I said, in the snap of a finger. Before you know it, Lugo had blown the game, and the Mets were way too far behind because they gave up 5 runs. I mean, how in the heck does Lugo give up 5 runs? That sounds impossible. After he had not given up a run for a month, he gives up 5 runs in 1 outing because then you bring in Luis Avilan, who's serving up hits and letting more guys score. A complete disaster. Jerry's Familia It wasn't a pretty inning, but it was a scoreless inning later on. But you know what? I mean, Mickey Callaway, the fact that he just took Mets out of this game, I'm still not over it. Like, I am literally heated that he did such a thing and that he messed up the team. This cost them the game. And then to make it even worse, sticking with Lugo when he didn't have it and letting him literally lose the game in front of your very eyes and not going to somebody else is such a joke. And I just hate that the Mets let it happen, that they let Mickey Callaway blow these games and lie. I hate a liar because you know what? Let's be frank about sports. You know, I'm an honest person, you know what I mean? And for Mickey Callaway to be such a liar and say one thing and do the total opposite. I mean, you know what? This week, even against the Kansas City Royals, these games, Mickey Callaway has done a terrible job managing with the bullpen, with the lineup, with the pinch hitters, with the starting rotation. Everything has been terrible, honestly. It really has. This guy is not a good manager. And I have no idea how the Mets are supposed to get in front of the Phillies and the Brewers and the Nationals and the Cubs and hang on to a wild card spot while Mickey Callaway is the manager, making these critical decisions. I mean, when they're going to have these tough stretch of games where they play the Indians and they play the Braves again and they play the Cubs and the Phillies, you really think Mickey Callaway is going to make the right choices to beat those teams? No way. The guy, I don't even know what is the word to describe Mickey Callaway, because you can't. He's one of a kind. He's a one-of-a-kind dummy because, I mean, I can't get over it. I seriously cannot. That he took Steven Matz out of this game and blew the game. These games against Atlanta are critical. If you did well against Atlanta, if you had a good series, you could have kind of been in the division a little bit and really gotten a wild card spot. All of a sudden, you fell further behind and, you know, just put the Mets in a tough spot and you lost the series right there. And, again, just the way they let it happen drove me nuts. And then the game after that, again, we're just going to skip ahead because, you know what, all this other stuff does not really matter. But Mets, they get 23 hits. And I'm like, what the heck? 23 hits, 10 runs. They're up 10-3. And you're like, oh, they blew out the Braves. You know, at least they finished the series strong. And then they could go in and beat up on a weak Kansas City team. That's what you're thinking. It's 10-3. You go to Drew Gagnon, who had recently been called up. And what does Drew Gagnon do? He gives up a home run, and it's now 10-4. And you're like, all right, he gave up a home run. Freddie Freeman's a great hitter. The Braves, they hit a bunch of home runs. No big problem. Then in the ninth inning, Drew Gagnon gives up another home run, and you're like, okay, now it's getting pretty close. Then Drew Gagnon gives up another home run, and you're like, all right, this is getting ridiculous. You might have to take him out, and you might have to bring in one of your back-end relievers like an Edwin Diaz or a Familia or Lugo into this game because it is getting that close, and you cannot lose this game. This literally would have been the end of the season had they blown this type of lead after getting 23 hits. But Drew Gagnon serves up 4 home runs, and then he did have to go to Edwin Diaz, and this game went from 10-3 in the 8th inning to 10-8. And Edwin Diaz walks Brian McCann, and you know what? The first pitch that Edwin Diaz threw, it was way in the other strike zone, in the other batter's box, excuse me. And I was like, Edwin Diaz is really going to start this. And I was like, if Edwin Diaz does not have it, he's going to serve up a 2-run homer because he just walked Brian McCann. And Ender Inciarte, who is like the worst hitter in the Braves lineup average-wise with his .242 average, was having a great series against the Mets. No surprise there. Of course, the weak hitters do well. And I was like, if Ender Inciarte, he killed the Mets really bad last year, whether it was with diving plays or if it was with, you know, getting bunts and reaching base, you know, all the different things that Ender Inciarte can do in a ball game, you really did not want to see him strike against the Mets again. And Edwin Diaz was able to strike him out and ended up winning. A little bit, but out Ender Inciarte, Mets win the game 10-8. And again, Mickey Callaway just put the Mets in a really, really difficult position where they almost lost the game. And decision. Sorry about that, everyone. The computer did end up freezing, but just the main takeaway is that in these tough games against these better teams, Mickey Callaway was making mistakes, and that's not a surprise, but it's just going to be very fascinating that as the schedule picks up, will he make the right decisions, and will everybody do what they're supposed to do? Will the Mets get more healthy? I mean, with Jeff McNeil getting hurt and J.D. Davis getting hurt, they're using Altair and Lagares and these guys. And you know what? I just hope that the Mets could keep it close, have Nimmo come back, Dom Smith come back, Jed Lowry come back, maybe, who knows. Go, continue to win games, actually compete against these better teams, beat the better teams, get the wild card, make the playoffs. But I'll be back tomorrow to talk about the rest of the Royal series. Until then, leave a like, leave a comment, hit the subscribe button, turn on the notifications to know when that Royals video is up. Tell your friends, everybody you know. Appreciate you watching. Have a good one, everybody.